Imagine a scene from the year 1600. A massive Spanish army, 25,000 strong, marches with absolute confidence. They are the elite of the Spanish Empire, a force of experienced infantry and heavy cavalry, sent to crush a rebellion once and for all. Their target, the fledgling Dutch Republic and its tiny army of just 12,000 soldiers. On paper, it's a massacre waiting to happen. The Dutch seem utterly doomed, but this isn't a story about numbers. This is a story about strategy, terrain, and the iron will of a nation fighting for its very survival. This is the Battle of Newport, a pivotal moment in the 80 Years' War, the long and brutal struggle for Dutch independence from Spain. The Spanish Empire, the global superpower of its day, could not tolerate this defiance. They believed no rebellion should ever be allowed to succeed, and they sent their best to make an example of the Dutch. But the Dutch had a few secret weapons of their own. They weren't just fighting on home soil. They knew how to make the soil itself fight for them. Their commanders, like Maurice of Nassau, were military innovators, and they had trained their soldiers in a new kind of warfare, one built on discipline and precision. They were about to turn the battlefield into a perfectly engineered trap. The Dutch preparations were meticulous. They didn't choose an open field where the Spanish heavy cavalry could dominate. Instead, they positioned themselves near the coast, using the landscape to their advantage. They anchored their lines on marshes, shallow rivers, and sand dunes. These weren't just obstacles, they were weapons. The Dutch commanders carefully placed their units to control every choke point. Blocks of disciplined pikemen formed a wall of steel, ready to halt any charge. Musketeers and archers were positioned to pour fire into any Spanish formation that got bogged down. And hidden from view were small, elite units, poised to strike with surgical precision when the moment was right. This wasn't going to be a simple clash of armies. This was terrain warfare at its absolute finest. As the sun rose on the day of the battle, the Spanish advanced. Their long, dense columns marched forward, a sea of steel and polished armor. They were confident, perhaps even arrogant, expecting the rebels to break and run at the very sight of their might. But almost immediately, their advance began to falter. The marshy ground, which looked firm from a distance, sucked at the boots of the infantry and the hooves of the horses. The cavalry, their greatest asset, struggled to maintain formation. The neat Spanish lines began to stretch and fragment. Commands shouted by officers were lost in the confusion as eunuchs struggled to navigate the difficult terrain. All the while, the Dutch army waited. They held their ground with remarkable patience, letting the landscape do its work, tiring out the enemy before a single shot was fired in anger. Then, the trap was sprung. Just as the Spanish were most disorganized and vulnerable, the Dutch struck from the reeds and mists of the marshes. Elite Dutch units launched surprise attacks, hitting the Spanish flanks where they were least expected. Coordinated counterattacks were launched across the shallow rivers, catching the Spanish off. Disciplined formations of pikemen and musketeers advanced, their precise volleys tearing into the now disordered Spanish ranks. The Spanish lines, which had seemed so invincible just an hour before, began to waver and then break. Panic started to ripple through their forces. Soldiers who tried to retreat found themselves trapped by the very same terrain that had slowed their advance. The Dutch pressed their advantage relentlessly. Their smaller numbers didn't matter, because every unit was being used with maximum efficiency, turning the Spanish army's size against it. What followed was chaos. The orderly Spanish advance evolved into a desperate, panicked retreat. The marshy ground became a death trap. Soldiers slipped and fell, heavy armor pulling them down. Horses stumbled, throwing their riders and creating more confusion. In the chaos, officers couldn't communicate orders. The command structure completely collapsed. Panic became contagious. All the while, the Dutch remained a picture of control. They methodically pushed forward, their disciplined formations acting like a net, closing in on the trapped Spanish. The battle wasn't just a physical defeat for the Spanish, it was a psychological catastrophe. Their pride and their aura of invincibility were shattering with every passing moment. The aftermath was stunning. Against all odds, the Dutch had won a decisive victory. The cost to the Spanish was enormous, not just in men, but in reputation. Their aura of invincibility, which had terrified Europe for a century, was broken. For the Dutch, The victory was a massive boost to morale. It proved that they could stand against the might of the Spanish Empire and win. It was a crucial step on their long road to independence, a testament to the idea that smart strategy and disciplined execution could overcome brute force. Let's break down how they did it. The Dutch center was the anchor of their entire army. It was a solid wall of pikemen, their long pikes creating an impenetrable hedge of steel. Behind them, musketeers delivered continuous volleys of fire. Every time the Spanish tried to smash through the center with a direct assault, they were met with this perfectly coordinated defense. The pikes held them at bay, and the musket fire decimated their ranks. This unbreakable center not only held the line but also served as the pivot point, allowing the flanks to maneuver and strike, amplifying the chaos among the Spanish forces. The Dutch left flank was a masterpiece of tactical planning. It was positioned next to a shallow river and a wide marsh, turning the entire area into a natural funnel. The initial Spanish assault on this flank was channeled directly into the boggy ground. As the Spanish infantry and cavalry struggled through the mud, they were hit by devastating fire from Dutch musketeers and archers concealed on the firmer ground. Horses stumbled, and infantry formations dissolved into a confused mob. The left flank became a bottleneck of death and panic for the Spanish army. The right flank faced a similar test and executed a similar strategy. Here, the elite Spanish cavalry tried to use their weight and speed to punch through the Dutch line. But again, the marshy terrain and the rivers slowed their charge to a crawl, robbing them of their momentum. As the cavalry became bogged down, Dutch infantry units struck from concealed positions, hitting them from the side and rear. Soldiers who tried to turn and retreat were cut down. Every single step of the Spanish advance, on every part of the field, was met with this kind of surgical precision. And finally, we have the elite strikers. The Dutch commanders placed their best, most mobile troops at key points in their formation. Their job was not to hold the line, but to act as a scalpel. They were tasked with hitting the Spanish where they were most vulnerable. They targeted enemy commanders to disrupt the chain of command. They launched lightning-fast strikes to break key formations and create gaps. They exploited the panic caused by the terrain, appearing seemingly out of nowhere to turn confusion into a full-blown rout. This perfect coordination between the steady center, the deadly flanks, and the elite strikers meant the Spanish leadership completely lost control. The retreat turned into a disaster, and the Dutch, against all odds, were masters of the battlefield. The lesson of Newport is timeless. The Dutch, with their smaller but highly disciplined and well-led army, achieved a stunning victory. The Spanish, despite their overwhelming numbers and power, were defeated by a superior strategy. This battle became a powerful symbol, proving that knowledge of the terrain, unwavering discipline, and brilliant tactics can triumph over brute force. It's a powerful reminder that the biggest army doesn't always win the war. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into military history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories of strategy and triumph. We'll see you in the next one.